Mike's on? Okay, who do we have on the telephone lines?
Jeremy's here. Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I hear you're not feeling 100%?
No.
Okay, well, welcome
But you get to
anyways.
listen to- well, thank you. You get to listen to my voice regardless.
Okay. We're looking forward to that. Who else do we have on the lines? Okay, so far we just have. So I'd like to call to order the November the 8th, 2017 public session. And at the Upper Canada District School Board, we are a respectful, peaceful people and value our relationships. With this in mind, I'd like to acknowledge that this meeting is situated upon the traditional territory of the Akwesasne Mohawk, keepers of the Eastern Door for the Haudenosaunee Iroquois Confederacy, and I'd also like to recognize the enduring presence of the first people on this land. Director, we're going to stand for the singing of O Canada. And the flags are at the back and the screen's here, so you choose where you want to look. And Director, could I ask you to do a roll call, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, trustees and our guests. This is our roll call for the board meeting of 8 November 2017. Trustee Armour.
Present.
First Vice Chair Karkner.
Present.
Trustee Cran. Present. Trustee Jacobs.
Present.
Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Present.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Present.
Trustee McAllister.
Present.
Second Vice Chair McDonald.
Present.
Chair McMillan.
Present.
Trustee Richards.
Present.
Trustee Swan.
Present.
Student Trustee Marshall Wilson.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board approve consent agenda items 3.02, 3.03, November 8th, 2017, as submitted. Moved by Trustee Karkner, seconded by Trustee John McAllister. Ask you to cast your votes, please. David, you're in favor? In favor? And that carries. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to our first item. This is a very special evening for us. We have some special guests at the back of the room, and I want to acknowledge that we have Grand Chief Abram Benedict, we have Donald Hash, Andrea Carpenter, and Rosemary Square. So welcome to the board. This is a very special night for us at the Upper Canada District School Board. We've always been extremely proud of the relationship that we have with the Akwesasne Board of Education, and tonight is just an extension of the pride that we have as we move forward to sign a new agreement between us. So, you know, actually what I'm going to ask us to do now is to move to this table, and we can carry the conversation on back there. So if I can get the Grand Chief to join us at the table and the Director, and we'll just move back. As I had said earlier, we're extremely proud at the Upper Canada District School Board of the relationship that and the partnership that we have with the Akwesasne Mohawk Board of Education. This is our commitment to our future by working with our young people in our respective communities. This has been an ongoing relationship and partnership. We continue it tonight. We're extremely proud, and I do welcome our guests. Thank you very much for being here.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Director, members of the board, executive, as well as our director, Dave. I didn't see you when you came in there. I'm pleased to be here this evening to share in the renewal of our tuition agreement. This is something that our community is very proud of, to be partners with you to provide services to our community children, as well as other services as described in the agreement. But I want to mark that it's more than just a service agreement between the boards and our community, because it's something that I know, being in this sector for quite some time now, is that we all can be very proud of, because there are boards across this province in which work with First Nations. I wouldn't even, in some instances, I wouldn't even say work with them. They kind of provide a service and there's no real relationship. And I know that the agreement that we have had for a number of years is a real model that we can all be proud of, that we can stand behind and say that we have a working relationship, that we stand together to provide the best possible service to our community children, for the common goals that we have as partners and as two communities coming together to deliver service. And I'm very pleased to be here to sign a new agreement between the Upper Canada District School Board as well as the Akwesasne Mohawk Board of Education and the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. So thank you very much to all of you for your dedication, and to our staff, to the hard work that they've put into getting to this point. Because, you know, myself, I get to come and say all the great words and talk about the wonderful things that I know is happening, but I know the heavy lifting is happening on the ground. I want to acknowledge our staff as well as your staff that's been working hard to ensure that these services continue and that we can be a model for the rest of the province, in fact, the rest of the country, to look at the partnership, what that's really about. So thank you very much.
before we're going to take a break in a moment. Because we have another board here, I think it's important that I do announce the titles as well, and I apologize for not doing that. Donna Lash, can you just put your hand up? Donna is the director, and Andrea Carpenter is the assistant, I assume. Okay. And Rosemary Squire is the chair of the board. Welcome. I apologize for not the titles I should have, because you're certainly members of your own board, and you're welcome at our board as well. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to, do I need a motion for a...
You have to take a motion to recess.
Right. So I need a motion to recess. We're going to take a 10-minute break and get a motion for that. We just need to get some pictures taken. Trustee McDonald, Trustee Richards, just a show of hands. Okay, so we'll be back here at 10 to 7. Okay? Thank you, everyone. We're just going to do some pictures. Okay, who do we still have on the phone lines? Didn't lose anyone, I hope?
No, I'm still here.
Thank you. Trustee Swan?
I'm still here.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for everyone for that and getting back here on time. That was great. Okay, we're moving on to the next item, which is our financial statements. I'm going to, eventually we're going to hear from our Superintendent Nancy Barkley and our Comptroller of Finance, Carol McEwen, but I'm going to have David McDonald introduce us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will just very briefly just talk with the Audit Committee. We received the financial statements and a report from our auditors on Monday evening. Also a report from the Superintendent of Business and Controller of Finance, Carol McEwen, on Monday. Very happy with the position that we're in as far as being in a positive situation. I'll let staff expand on that. But I will add some comments at the end. It goes without saying that the financial statements are our financial statements. They're not the financial statements of the auditors. They just come in and verify and validate the work that we've done. In order to do that, it requires a large amount of work on behalf of the staff. So to Superintendent Barkley and Carol McEwen and all the staff, the work that goes in to meet with the auditors to get the finished product, but more importantly, the work that happens over the course of the year that puts us in a position that we're in, so that we can have a clean bill of financial health at the end of our fiscal year, at the end of August. So thank you to Carol and Nancy and all the staff that make this happen and make it go smoothly for the auditors when they do come in. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay.
Chair of the Audit Committee. As Trustee McDonald expressed, we did earn another clean audit report from KPMG for our 16-17 financial statements, of which we should be very proud. As he also said, the auditors collaborated well with our accounting team to audit and complete the preparation of these statements within very tight timelines so that they could be presented to the Audit Committee 2 evenings ago, where there was a detailed review with the members of the Audit Committee, and to provide to this group this evening. And then, of course, so that we can meet the Ministry's submission deadline of November 15th. If I may, I'd like to take a moment to publicly express to the finance team, a couple of whom may be watching, my appreciation for meeting the deadlines with accurate results. Much of the leadership and cooperation with the field audit team is credited to Diana Kingston, our Manager of Accounting Services, who was in attendance at the Audit Committee meeting, but unable to be here in person tonight, although most likely one of the folks watching from afar. Saying that, though, this work is never accomplished alone, so Diana was supported by many other folks within the finance team, and also all departments and schools of the board provided the documentation, invoices, journal entries, etc., that were needed to accomplish this end result. Analysis of the results were being performed as late as this past weekend, and there were many minds involved in that to make sense of the results when comparing to way back at the time of the original approved budget in the spring of 2016, which is almost a year and a half ago. And even though that was a long time ago, you will recall that financial forecasts have been shared with the board throughout this fiscal year, 2016-17, to advise and project the financial results as information became available. And the most recent of those was this past June. So Carol McEwen, our Controller of Finance, is prepared to take the board through a more summarized review of the 16-17 financial results compared to a more detailed review that we had the other night with the Audit Committee. And those results are a culmination of the forecasts throughout the year that you have seen, plus any information impacting the bottom line that can only be determined at year end. And before Carol begins, I also want to thank her for her contributions to the year-end process and for her leadership of the finance team throughout the year, and of course for being here tonight to present. So now I'll pass it over to Carol.
Thank you, Superintendent Barclay. And through you, Chair, I'd like to begin tonight by drawing your attention to the Upper Canada District School Board mission, which is at the bottom of the screen in front of you. We prepare all students for a successful life. We take pride in the fact that our financial strength and stability continue to support our mission. And in particular, we'd like to thank tonight and express our appreciation for the efforts put forth by our senior team, our system staff, and our Board of Trustees that enable us to do so. This slide will give you a picture of where we are in our business cycle. At the moment, we're actually living in the 17-18 fiscal year, which is represented by the blue boxes along the top of the timeline you see. Very soon, we'll be embarking upon the beginning of the 2018-19 fiscal year budget deliberations, which is represented by the green boxes at the bottom right of the timeline. But the focus of tonight's report is on the 2016-17 fiscal year and the presentation of the financial statements to the Board of Trustees, which is represented by the orange box circled at the bottom left of the timeline. So you can see it's a bit of a busy cycle. Again, this year, we're very pleased to report that the Board achieved a compliant financial status in accordance with the Education Act. For compliance purposes, we had an operating surplus of $1.6 million. Given that we have a surplus, we automatically achieve a compliant status. The other compliance threshold that we are required to meet relates to our administration and governance envelope. The measurement criteria for this compliance calculation is that our total expenses in the areas of board administration and governance must not exceed the funding envelope that we've been granted by the ministry. We met that benchmark in 16-17, therefore, again, we are compliant. And at the bottom left of the screen, you'll see that in keeping with the trend information that has been provided to you throughout the year, within Superintendent Barclay's financial forecast presentations, this graph provides a complete picture of where we began when the budget was approved by the Board of Trustees in June of 2016 and where we ultimately arrived in August 2017. We will review the major factors that contributed to the change in the surplus from the original budget to our actual financial statements for the year later in this presentation. Before I move on to the review of our audited financial statements, I would like to briefly recap why you will see a difference between our in-year surplus in our audited financial statements, which are in your agenda package tonight, versus our in-year surplus for ministry compliance purposes, which we just discussed. In order to arrive at our surplus for compliance purposes of $1.6 million, which is at the bottom of the screen, we started off with the in-year surplus on our audited financial statements of $7.7 million, which is shown at the top of our Statement of Operations and is calculated based on Canadian public sector accounting standards. We then have to apply adjustments to that balance strictly for compliance determination and reporting purposes to the ministry. For items that the ministry either requires to be externally appropriated in order to meet future obligations, or for which they do not believe are related to the ministry-funded operations of our board. The first three adjustments items that you see on the screen fall under the first category, the largest of which is funding of our retirement gratuities. The fourth item is the net surplus that was generated by school-generated funds this year. Any surplus or deficit generated by school-generated funds are excluded from the compliance calculations as they are not viewed as being intended for board-level operations. And the final item represents revenue that the board received from the ministry to fund the purchase of land, which does not depreciate. This funding is subject to a different accounting treatment than comparable funds received to purchase depreciable assets, such as buildings or equipment. This revenue results in a positive impact on our bottom line, which must be removed from our in-year surplus when calculating our level of compliance. The combined impact of these adjustments in 2016-17 is slightly under $6.1 million, resulting in an in-year surplus for compliance purposes of 1.6. Moving away from our compliance results, we'll now look at the results contained in our audited financial statements, beginning with our consolidated statement of operations, sometimes referred to as the income statement. So the top line on the screen, as we discussed earlier, the statement of operations reflects that we ended the fiscal year with a surplus of $7.7 million versus our original budget, which anticipated an in-year surplus of $5.8 million, resulting in a favorable variance of approximately 1.9. The major contributing factors to this variance are listed above. The first one being an increase in our GSN funding related to enrollment of approximately $1 million, which is essentially the higher than projected elementary enrollment of 176 students, slightly lower secondary enrollment of 25 students, and lower over 21 secondary students of 144. The next line indicates we also had a higher level of GSN non-enrollment related funding increase of approximately $800,000, the bulk of which related to an increase in Indigenous education studies credits. The first two positive contributors were partially offset by an increase in instructional salaries and benefits of $1.2 million. As was forecasted during the year, the Upper Canada Leger Centre ended the year with a higher surplus than was originally budgeted by approximately $234,000, which, when consolidated into the UCDSB statements, had a positive impact on our bottom line. The next line represents additional non-salary and benefit expenses that were incurred during the year that provided student supports. Initiatives focused on areas of student safety, student records, and classroom resources. There were two Ministry of Education adjustments that related to grants that had been earned in prior years, one being related to an enrollment review of the 2014-15 fiscal year, and the other being a special education funding calculation update for the 2015-16 fiscal year. The financial impact of these prior period adjustments was not known at the time the original budget was approved. The next two items had a positive impact on the board's surplus. The first one being lower than projected workers' compensations claims costs. The second one being the reduction of our employee extended health and dental future claims liability. Both of these items are event-driven and can be difficult to predict over an extended period of time. And finally, our net 16-17 school-generated fund surplus and our land revenue amounts of $600,000 and $700,000 respectively had direct positive impacts on our bottom line. However, as was noted earlier, although these variances impacted our overall surplus, they are excluded for compliance calculations purposes. And finally, we'll take a high-level look at our detail of accumulated surplus, which is essentially a summarized financial view of what made up our accumulated surplus and deficit balances at the beginning of the year, the impact of our in-year financial results, and the resulting balances at the end of the fiscal year. This statement is divided into two main sections. Lines 1, 2, and 3 describe the accumulated surplus amounts that are available for compliance. Line 4 represents the amounts that are unavailable for compliance and are externally appropriated. And line 5 represents our net total accumulated surplus, core deficit. So looking at line 1, it is the portion of our accumulated surplus that is unallocated. In other words, it has not been internally appropriated by our board for any specific reason. Line 2 represents the portion of our accumulated surplus that has been internally appropriated by our board for specific purposes. Items on this line include investments maintained as protection against the risk of significant future workers' compensation claims, school budget surplus balances, and amounts necessary to cover unfunded capital depreciation expenses in future years. Line 4 represents the portion of our accumulated surplus that is unavailable for compliance. These are the same items that you saw earlier when we looked at the reconciliation of our in-year surplus on slide 5. They include employee future benefits for retirement gratuities, interest to be accrued, school-generated funds, and land revenue. The largest of which, again, by far, is the employee future benefits for retirement gratuities, which accounts for $16.2 million of our ending balance. The middle column reflects the overall impact. This is the column that ties everything all together. It reflects the overall impact of our 2016-17 financial results. In that column, on line 3, is our in-year surplus for compliance purpose that I've mentioned a few times of $1.6 million that you first saw back at the beginning of the presentation on the compliance slide. It is the operating results figure by which we are measured by the Ministry of Education. Then after we add back in the components of our in-year results that must be excluded for compliance purposes, which equal $6.1 million, we arrive back at our total in-year financial statement surplus of $7.7 million. Overall, our audited financial statement in-year surplus of $7.7 million resulted in an improvement of the board's total accumulated deficit, bringing it from a deficit position at the beginning of the year to a brand new surplus balance of $4.3 million. Mr. Chair, this concludes my report on the 2016-17 financial statements.
Thank you very much. We'll open up the floor or the telephone lines for comments or questions. Anyone on the phone lines have a question? No one at the table? I had such a thorough job that there are no questions. I thank you very much for that. Thank you. I need a motion that the Upper Canada District School Board adopt the 2016-17 audited financial statements. Moved by Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee McAllister. And I'll ask you to cast your votes, please. And that carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item is the capital update. I'm going to turn this over to Superintendent Jeremy Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are you driving for me? Okay, thank you. I got the remote. My pleasure to bring you yet another in our many chapters of the capital update saga today. We've got a pretty full presentation for you today, so I'd like to just run through some of the items that we'd like to touch on. First, we'd like to touch on the capital spend for summer 2017 and give you some highlight projects from our program of work this summer. Give you an update on the Bridgewood and Kemptville Public School project closeouts. Touch on school consolidation capital projects. Speak briefly about childcare capital funding submissions and capital priority submissions, and then onto an outlook for budget 17-18. So for the 16-17 capital spend this summer construction season, you can see actually that we've done actually fewer projects this summer than we had in the previous summer. So we only did only 76 capital projects, but pretty big value. So over $30 million in value. And one of the highlights I'd like to make is that this is a result of the ministry's recent influx of funding around school consolidation capital funding, which is almost doubled actually our annual capital spend in that envelope. So even though we've done fewer projects, they're much bigger and more complicated projects, so around double the size. And to some extent, you see that reflected in some of the project scheduling in the summer. So projects starting earlier and projects ending later, much later in some cases, but generally speaking, much bigger projects and more complex projects. One of the things that this has allowed us to do with this influx in funding is do some things that are not just about keeping the lights on. We've had some opportunities to collaborate with communities. So this is some work we did out at Thousand Islands Elementary School with a Veterans Memorial Garden, working with the municipality and some community groups there to help them realize their vision on our property. We've, as you know, near and dear to my heart is our branding initiative that you've heard about many times before, and our commitment to actually get signage on schools reflecting that we're Upper Canada District School Board schools. So that's something that's rolled out this summer to many of the schools where we were doing construction work. We've been working actually on branding, thinking about branding in terms of making our schools more welcoming places to enter. So you'll see lots of work for us doing canopies to shield people from the elements. So that's not a direct result of me standing in the rain sometimes waiting to be buzzed into a school. It's really just about making our places more welcoming for our schools and communities. There's been a significant influx in funding for greenhouse gas reduction. So this is the stuff that gets my guys really excited, is changing out boilers. So this is, I believe this is Westminster Public School. Lots of examples of projects where we've been looking at reducing our energy and carbon footprint. I know at least one trustee will recognize this, so we call it smooth entries. So we've been paving anything that'll stand still over the course of the last summer, really trying to make parking lots and that experience of coming into the school more pleasurable. a lot of cases what we're trying to do is revamp and reorient things like bus lanes and routing of traffic in those parking lots to deal with the new realities where, you know, it seems like a lot of parents are driving their kids to school nowadays, and that's caused some challenges for schools, particularly in pickup and drop-off times. Trying to focus on the student experience, so looking at how we actually make play structures and the outdoor spaces more welcoming. That's the subject of another initiative within the department to start setting some sort of minimum standards so that we can make sure that schools aren't left in a situation where a community feels like they're on the hook to fundraise for a play structure. We feel we have a role to play there. We've been working that way this summer. Jumping right on here to Bridgewood Public School, it opened in September 2016, but oftentimes what happens is these projects take us a little bit longer to close out. And when we say close out, we mean, you know, finish up remaining work. Oftentimes there's, you know, additional project work or fixes to be done. And then we have all the invoices to come in as well. So we've actually, we did really well financially on this project. We're actually proposing to close the project out with about $1.3 million unspent of the original budget. And what we're proposing to do is actually direct that towards the new Cornwall High School project, because we do have permission from the Ministry of Ed to keep that money and direct it to another approval to proceed project, which would be a major capital project. With respect to Kemptville Public School, as you know, this opened in September. It was also under budget, not quite as much as the Cornwall Public School, but leaving us with somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to the good after all of our remaining sort of projects and wish list are closed out. And again, our suggestion there would be we retain that money and direct it towards one of our upcoming approval to proceed projects. One of those projects may very well be, as I'll talk about a little later, the addition of daycare spaces at Kemptville Public School if that project goes forward. With regard to school consolidation capital projects, as you'll recall, these were awarded by the Ministry of Education in June 2017. So Cornwall High School, this is very similar to the update I gave you at that time. Again, we're looking at around September 2023 for opening date for that school. We're currently in the process of evaluating site options. So we spend quite a bit of time at the front end of projects working with the municipality and realtors to look at potential parcels of land that would be suitable for construction. We have a process where we identify a number of options, go through a process of identifying our preferred option, and then working with the Ministry of Education to fund that. So we're actually just in the process right now of identifying all the options there. With regard to the Brockville Elementary School, we are actually we're proposing a repeat design of Bridgewood. We're looking at a risk-adjusted opening date of September 2022, and we're actually got the list of site options down here and are starting to work with the ministry and landowners to start talking about potential purchase process. And the Roxmore addition, surprise, surprise, we know pretty much exactly where we're going to build that. It'll be attached to Roxmore, and we're going to be opening that hopefully in the 2020 timeframe. Right now, we're just actually in the tail end of the architect selection process, so that will be moving along fairly quickly. With regard to childcare capital funding, so as you may recall, the June memo from the Ministry of Education requested the board submit business cases for capital childcare funding. So this gives you the list of projects that we've proposed. So new additions at the new Brockville school. So believe it or not, we don't even have a shovel in the ground, and we're already preparing to put the first addition on that school. Hopefully we'll be able to do the things at the same time. And also an addition at Kemptville Public School, the new Kemptville Public School. So again, another brand new school where we're contemplating an addition. And then a series of retrofits, Linklater, Rockland. I believe Pleasant Corners has actually since been removed by the CMSM. And Russell Public and Nation View Public. So we expect further guidance about which proposals have been successful in funding announcements in late 2017 or early 2018, and again, hopefully in a time frame so that we can integrate some of those additions with, for example, the new Brockville School. With regard to annual capital priorities, so you'll recall back in January, there was the ministry had a pot of funding called School Consolidation Capital. We submitted business cases, and those are all construction projects that were arising due to consolidation efforts. In other words, the reduction of excess pupil places. Subsequently, the ministry opened a window for us to submit proposals for their capital priorities program, which has been the more standard program where we're looking for new school construction or major renovations or additions. In our case, what we did, because this was such a quick turnaround, we actually took the remaining projects that were not funded as a result of the school or through the school consolidation capital process. Plus, we took a couple of remaining projects that were previous capital priorities and resubmitted these. So the projects that we submitted in September were an addition at North Granville District High School, a replacement of Perth District Collegiate Institute, the addition at Wellington Elementary School to accommodate students from Maynard, a new school at Caldwell to replace Caldwell's K-6, and an addition at Williamstown Public School. So at present, it's our understanding that the Ministry of Education is presently considering those business cases and is expecting to make announcements about whether we are successful on any of them in early 2018. And finally, 17-18 budget highlights. So in terms of our operating budget or our capital budget for 17-18, we have about $24 million in new funding. Of that, we have school renewal is $6.5 million, school condition improvement about $16.9 million, and childcare retrofit in the neighborhood of $1 million. Our total 17-18 budget, including carry forwards, so we are at the end of a fiscal year. If all of our capital budget for that year is not spent, the ministry does permit us to carry forward the unspent portion into the next fiscal year. So our total capital funding available for us this year is $52,900,000. So big numbers. And we also, there's been a greenhouse gas reduction funding that I mentioned earlier, was announced in April 2017. It runs to March 31st, 2018, and the total funding for that is about $4.2 million, and I believe we've actually almost spent through that in the round of projects this summer. Thank you.
Lots happening. Lots going to happen. Trustees, comments or questions? Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Through you, Chair, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about Roxmore's anticipated, so that'll be our first build through this new accommodations that we've done. And is it at all possible that with our selection of a new architect that we're maybe going to need to buy new land, because obviously we're going to fix the busing and the parking issues and everything there. Do you figure we're still going to have enough property with what we have there?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we've actually already, as part of the business case process, submitted what they call a space template, which outlines the actual size of the proposed addition, and we're confident we have the space there.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
And when you say we're going at the tail end of the architectural selections, when do you think we would start that? Really have picked an architect or design guy?
I believe it'll be early 2018. We'll have actually formalized the selection.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask, when we have surpluses when we're building new schools, it's my understanding we go to the ministry to ask that we can reuse the surplus. Is that correct? And I have a secondary to that.
Mr. Chair, the practice has been that if we have a surplus, we tend to communicate with the ministry early and often about that surplus because we don't want to lose it. But their practice has been that, and in these two cases that we're referring today, they've confirmed that we're allowed to apply those funds to other projects that fall under the what they call the approval to proceed category. So they tend to be major projects like additions or major retrofits or rebuilds. So it wouldn't be I wouldn't have a lot of latitude to apply that to for example, a general renovation that we might do out of school renewal.
Okay, and a secondary then, may I, through you, Chair?
Certainly.
Then, when we get this approval from the ministry, do we tend to try and keep the funding from the surpluses in the communities where the surpluses occurred?
Mr. Chair, so I would say that's our general practice. So, for example, in the case of North Granville District High School, and we built that school, I believe we ended that project of the school proper with over $1 million unspent in the budget. and we secured the approval of the Ministry of Ed to allow us to go and apply that to a new project, which was the track at North Grenville District High School. So to the extent possible, we do. The challenge will be that in some cases the community may not have any upcoming approval to proceed projects, and therefore may not qualify for us to apply those funds in any way in the immediate municipality. So it really boils down to just a question of practicality about whether there are qualifying projects available for us to apply those funds to in a given community.
Thank you.
Trustee McAllister.
With regard to the greenhouse gas reduction element and with regard to changing out boilers, is it just simply changing out boilers, or is there new technology being used?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we've had some experiments with new technology. So a number of years ago, there was a Green Schools Pilot Initiative, which was another source of capital funding that came out from the Ministry of Education, and that was part of a broader government effort in order to kickstart the green energy kind of industry in the province of Ontario. So there's a lot of effort for us to do work on experimental technologies with a pretty strong business case. And what we found in a lot of cases was that there wasn't really, we were a little too bleeding edge in some of them. So in the case of Tugwa, for example, which is well known to have electric heat, and very expensive electric heat, which was almost I think in the neighborhood of a quarter of our total board electrical bill, we put in a pellet heat silo and system there, and found out very quickly we can't get pellet in the volume that we need to heat the building. So in some cases we've been successful in looking at new technologies. In some cases where the technology really shows itself is in things like boilers, where yes, it's still a boiler, but the evolution of technology is such that you actually get quite dramatic leaps in efficiency, right, with those kinds of things. And in other cases, as you know, you'll see at some of our schools we've done solar. Like at Bridgewood, for example, or North Dundas, we have solar installations, right? But generally speaking, what we find is that people tend to think about things like boilers and think there hasn't been much evolution in the way of technology, but it is quite dramatic. Even since I've been building schools, it's quite different.
Thank you.
Student Trustee Marshall Wilson.
I think this is the time to ask this question. But when looking at renovating or building new schools, do we have policies on trying to stay eco-friendly, trying to move in that direction, or is it like what are our stances on that?
Well, generally, we look at when we build a school, we do a business case and we look at the 25-year operating cost of the school. So from a strictly financial perspective, it's in our interest to make sure that the school operates as efficiently as possible. But I think that we also recognize that there's a broader kind of impetus in the wider society to show more explicitly that we're looking at things more than a financial case. So in the case of Bridgewood, for example, we're actually currently going through the process with Bridgewood of LEED certification. So we expect that Bridgewood will be LEED Silver certified. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with LEED, but it stands for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. So it offers a pretty comprehensive array of standards that really touch on not just the actual structure itself, but the orientation of the structure on the property, energy saving mechanisms that you have to have in the structure, and even actually it incorporates how the actual process of construction happens, so and how we deal with waste materials on the site and those kinds of things. So we were going through the certification process for Bridgewood. Kemptville Public School, we elected not to go through the certification process because it's a repeat design. And we also, it's also quite expensive to go through the certification process. But yes, I think that that sort of green ethic is something that kind of pervades our thinking. And in fact, as we start talking about Cornwall and Brockville schools, we're even talking about stretching ourselves to go to a higher LEED standard, for example, right? And it's always balanced against the fact that our budget for building these sites is fixed, right? So, there's always a balance between how far do we want to go to push the bleeding edge, if you will, versus putting in amenities for students that they're going to actually be able to interact with, but front of mind all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Trustee
Through you, Chair.
Well, we'll go to Trustee Bill McPherson first. Okay.
When we look at this is more a comment than a question, but when we look at the capital spending, we tend to focus on the large projects, the new schools, the fancy additions. I have to admit that spending a few dollars strategically in some of the schools has a major impact upon the school. I will refer to T.R. Leger site in Smiths Falls. This time last year, it was nothing but potholes. They paved it over the summer, and there just seems to be a different attitude of the people going into that school. They feel, I guess, recognizes the fact it's actually school. They did a bunch of landscaping in there that the whole school looks more like a school. And the people using it, the students going into it, just seem to be reacting more positively. And sometimes the little things that don't cost a lot of dollars can have a fairly major impact on the school. And I'm glad to see the potholes disappear.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Hi. I didn't quite, through you, Chair, understand, and this is to Jeremy, through what he meant by Lear standards, if I have the acronym right. And it's quite expensive, and they're doing it for Bridgeview, but not Kentville. Is this just something we're doing for our environmental footprint, or is this something that's beneficial to the students in the school, other than the environmental footprint?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my impression is that, you know, LEED has standards all the way from bronze, silver, gold to platinum. And, you know, when we built the Bridgewood Public School and recognized that we were going to build Kentville Public School to the same design, what we wanted to do was demonstrate that we, as a board, that we had the sort of capacity and design chops to get a certification. The challenge for us in deciding what certification to go to was that it's not necessarily a linear kind of relationship between moving from bronze to platinum. It's quite a bit more expensive to actually build the kind of infrastructure that's required to get to platinum. And we felt that the silver stance really represented a really good, at the time, bang for the buck for us, which represented a good opportunity to showcase some of our technical discipline, but also a really good, I think, balance between the sort of technical and also what would show up in real tangible ways for students and staff. So, you know, I think that of all the things that people will often talk about, green roofs, for example, and having a green roof, and, you know, probably in the grand scheme of things, it's probably one of the most conspicuous ways to show that you're green, literally, but it's also probably one of the spectrum of strategies that we have, one of the least effective ways of making material differences in the actual building for kids. So, you know, like I would say that it makes a big difference. It makes difference in terms of comfort. It makes a difference in terms of the outdoor space. And I think that it's one of those things that starts to influence our culture as well of going through it. And that's, again, why we didn't really go pursue the actual certification part with Kentville. Kentville has virtually all the same design features as Bridgewood Public School. The certification is to demonstrate that we can do it. And then now it's really a matter of, instead of directing the money towards another certification, putting that money towards features in the school that are going to materially and positively impact the learning journey for kids.
Thank you.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Okay, through the chair, question this time. We have a huge inventory of schools that were built in the 50s and the 60s. And a great many of those schools are hitting the end of their lifetime. The new schools that we're building today, what is the anticipated lifespan of those schools?
Through you, Mr. Chair, far enough out that I don't have to worry about it. You know, we actually, it depends on the building component. So my anticipation is at least 50 years. Right, so that's we were actually just talking about this with the architect as we were at the Kentville Public School opening. So from a financial perspective, we look at business cases. If we can make a business case for it to build a new school, if it will pay for itself or have a payback period in the neighborhood of 13, 14, 15 years is good. But we tend to think of these things from a financial standpoint as being around for 25 years, but in practice we really build them to be around for 50 years plus.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Trustee Cartner, were you on the list?
Yes, I was. That's all right.
A long time ago.
I'll get even.
My apologies.
First of all, through you, Chair, thank you very much, Jeremy. I the pictures certainly augment your presentation. I'm very pleased to, as you well know, I'm pleased with the paving that has gone on at Pleasant Corners. It is now a pleasure to drive in there, and the way the parking has been set up for the buses is amazing. The signage is something that has been on the books for me for quite some time, and as the trustees know that I've been after signage, and it certainly shows up the schools that are done now, that you've renewed, and we know they're Upper Canada District School Board schools. The Memorial Garden is a great idea. There's partnership with the community, and I'm sure that's being well used at this particular time of the year. I have one question about the playground. You said that you're starting to add some structures to the schools, of course, following the whatever you need to follow to get them up safely. Are you still open to having the community or a parent council augment those playgrounds through the proper procedure, of course?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I was just waiting for a signal from the director. Of course we are. I think that our stance a little bit has been. I think in the past there was some impression. I think that it was the sole responsibility of the school community to actually provide those structures, and myself and my staff, we don't feel comfortable with that. But we also recognize that from practical purposes, we'll have a kind of minimum standard that is hopefully totally acceptable to communities that want to leave it at that, but we're always open to working with I think all kinds of different community members on how we can make schools better places for the kids in the community.
Thank you. Any other? Did I miss anyone on this?
No, not now.
Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And moving on to the next action item. This is the first student trustee report. Now it's time, so you only have an hour. Turn it over to you.
Good evening, all. To start off my report, I'm going to speak briefly to OFSTA, the Ontario Student Trustee Association. This past weekend, I spent it in Toronto at their first conference, the Fall General Meeting. I just wanted to bring back and say that it was an amazing opportunity and extend a thank you from OFSTA and from myself for us being member boards and for sending us. It's a great opportunity for any student trustee. There's a few projects that OFSTA's leading this year. The first one is they've released a few surveys to get feedback from students on the needs and such, so I just thought I'd communicate that with the board, that you might be seeing that around. And that's all for OFSTA. Then quickly moving to Student Senate, which is the bulk of my report. The first thing that Student Senate is looking at or has an interest in is social medias and communications. So really refining the communication process between ourselves and between me and the Senate. Social media presence is another one. Having the ability to easily communicate with the students that we represent is a key to succeeding in our roles. Also looking at a few initiatives, having student-led projects and refining how Student Senate deals and looks at those. Now I'm going to move into what happened at our first Student Senate meeting, which is pretty much just me bringing back to the board what the students said to me, what they thought was of value. We've split off into 4 committees this year to deal with certain issues or issues in the board. We're based off of the board work plan. So the first committee is graduation rates. One of the areas that they looked at was a term that they deemed public school pride, which is just a way to summarize the thought process and the process of looking at the differences between our school boards, the Catholic school boards, like why there's a cultural difference there, how the students interact with each other, and so on. The next point that they brought up was participation in schools, mostly by guidance counselors being interactive with their students, participation with students and teachers. This also falls under the community involvement and staff and student culture and teams. The next one is that the graduation rates committees themselves pointed out that they felt there was a lack of communication in classrooms, especially between teachers and between students. They pointed out that using more technology in classrooms may aid in this. The last thing they pointed out, well, the last big one that they pointed out was time management. So having schools provide more time management help, help dealing with stress, real life preparation, helping them organize deadlines and such. And then we'll move on to Student Wellness Committee. Their big area, as it's been an initiative in Student Senate for many years now, is the mental health area. So looking at that, looking at how we're dealing with it, how we're helping kids that have mental health. And a large area, well, one of the more innovative things that they're looking at this year, which is new from the past 2 years, is self-support, which I'll fall back to when I talk about increasing support groups. Another area they looked at was preparing younger grades to be leaders. So their thinking is if we can get kids interested in the leadership process, in Student Senate, in their school communities at a young age, they're more likely to stay with us throughout high school, so we won't lose them in the transition between elementary and high school to a coterminous board. And also it will increase student culture and such in our schools. So that was one of the big points that they were talking about at Student Senate. Another one is connecting youth programs, so having schools look outwards as well to programs in the communities and see where we can make ties, where we can communicate with them to incorporate them and make a better school environment. And then increasing support groups. So one thing that the Student Wellness Committee looked at was increasing support groups in schools for students like mental health, smoking, My Blueprint, so that's looking at preparing them for after high school life. And this also ties back to the self-support, so having some support groups led by students. A point there was that it's easier to talk about your problems or issues when you're in a room full of students instead of a room with half teachers, half students. The next committee is staff and school culture. Their first point was increasing diversity. I was not privy too much to this conversation, but from what I understand, it's talking about increasing the diversity of culture in our schools, which I believe we're doing a good job of, and I think they do too, so that's more of a point of just recognizing it. Having more approachable counselors is something that they brought up as students feel is a issue currently, is that counselors or nurses are not approachable enough. Sometimes they can feel that the environment is not too friendly. Communication inside of the school between administration and students, between teachers and students, more fluent, more real dialogues. Increasing spirit in schools is another point that the school and staff culture brought up, is that they believe there needs to be an increase in school spirit, which this falls more onto students, I would say. So having better student-led clubs and stuff inside of our schools. Another point they brought up was sports and clubs, so having more of those. Of course, that's another thing that's more for students to work on and deal with. The last committee is the Community Involvement Committee, which pointed out that they wanted to see more partnerships with outside organizations. That's going back to the student wellness with the connective youth programs. As well as they brought up an interesting idea, which was having schools, local schools, communicate with each other more, sort of work with each other, build off each other's resources. So that was interesting. Then the final item we talked about at Student Senate was the ministry survey on the student trustee position. And there were some interesting points here that I'm just going to briefly go over. I've highlighted the ones that I thought were worth bringing up. The first question was, how can boards increase the student voice in decision making? The first one was show that students' voice actually make an impact. So communicating with students that if something was brought to their attention, that it was acted upon, that something came out of it. Another one was more advocacy for opportunities, allowing students to get involved in their school boards. So that would be more along the lines of promoting Student Senate, promoting student councils and such. The next one is a little bit ironic to me. It was creating a platform for students to share their ideas, which was ironic to me because we're at Student Senate, which that's exactly what it is. So I think that touches on promotion and communication about what student senates are, what the trustee does, and such. The second question is, how can student trustees be supported to be successful in their role? What effects, practices can you share from your board or boards that you're familiar with? They highlighted that student senates is a great way to allow student trustees to be supported and more successful in their roles. Communicating through many different social media outputs is one of the things that I talked about earlier. It's something that I think as Senate we agree we need to work on. And communicating with senators, which, as I said, is something that we're going to look at, which is a better, more fluent dialogue between us. The next question went into the Education Acts and regulations on a one-year term of office. To summarize what that response was, is they thought the high turnover rate of student trustee allows for more diversity in the position, fresh starts, more new ideas. The next one talks about a longer term of office, what the benefits and challenges are. It's lower turnover rates, so they identified less diversity of ideas, but also more time to execute plans and more continuity between the years. Number 5 was thinking about the student trustee election process in your board and in boards that you're familiar with. What works well for you, what can be approved. They identified that students voting for their student trustee works quite well. Some boards just have an application process where their director or the board will choose the trustee, and they find that here, having the students elected, it does make a difference. The next question is, should there be greater consistency in the elections process for student trustees among school boards in Ontario? The consensus there was that having school boards form their own election processes is the best way to go about it. And the last point or question was how boards can promote the awareness of student trustee position within the larger student body. This went on to social media again, and just a lot of small things like that. Sweatshirts, sweaters for student senate, for student council positions, and advertising my position and the roles of student senators, and visiting schools as well. So have me go out, speak to students to really raise awareness from our position. That pretty much summarizes what we talked about and went over at Student Senate and what I feel should have been brought back to the board table. So thank you very much. And any questions? And my next meeting will be on December 8th at Grenville Hall. But thank you.
Thank you. I'll open it up to comments or questions.
Through you, Chair.
Yes, go ahead, Trustee Swan.
I would just like to thank you for a very comprehensive report, and I find it very interesting. And I hope to see you soon at Student Senate, which I will admit I've never attended before. And you've got my interest piqued, and I really always have realized the value, but I just have not been able to make it, and I look forward to attending one soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Trustee Jacobs.
We spoke about this at the over the weekend. We had a meeting with the trustees, and they gave us some materials to be able to show the students like the role of a trustee, and we spoke about having that information.
Just gets walked about.
We spoke about having that information, being able to relate to the student. There was great information in the PowerPoint, but some of the students might not understand how that information relates to them sitting in that chair and how their voice. So I did speak with them, and I'm looking to reach out to be able to help design how the student's voice can be heard in all the levels, and maybe more of a diagram of how the different levels, like a chain of command, help each other. And so that way the students will have a generalized idea of where to go and what kind of information should be heard by who. So there's it is being looked at, so I would like to work with that a lot more, and I will be reaching out for any information or comments in that direction. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? Trustee McAllister.
Through you, Chair.
Trustee McAllister first, and then Trustee Swan.
Student Trustee Marshall has done an excellent job here in terms of summarizing the discussion that occurred at Student Senate. What concerns me a little bit is what we're going to do with the information that we receive. And I suggest that there are several ways that we can deal with some of these issues. And one of them is the Tell Them For Me survey, to which we might want to add certain questions based on this material. The other would be the Ipsos Read Culture Survey, which we are undertaking. And the other might be some of the initiatives in the director's work plan. So I just don't want to see these initiatives fall by the wayside. I want some commitment on our part that we are going to pursue them.
Just a comment, just having been there, I fully appreciate the comments, but we have to also keep in mind that it came out of about a 1-hour conversation. This is a one-time experience, and I think some of these things obviously need to be explored in more depth. So, you know, it's when you get people just talking for an hour and you get a lot of feedback, you've created a good list of the feedback. I'm not sure if we need to jump immediately or explore. Like I said, it was an hour conversation or less that this information came out. It's not that I don't value it. I'm just saying that out of a 1-hour discussion, it asks more questions than it does things that we need to follow immediately up on. That's just my comment. Director.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Through you, I was going to build on your last comment that first impressions and lasting impressions are two very different things. And so in terms of the follow-up, I wanted to advise the board that the set of questions that are in Student Trustee Wilson's report has, the ones that are highlighted, come from the Ministry of Education's request to students and student councils to provide feedback on these matters that relate to student voice and student governance. So the deadline for reporting that out is November 14th, and so we'll be doing that on behalf of the board writ large, because as you know, there was a number of different advisory groups that were giving feedback on 5 topics, and one of the topics was about student trustee. For the other content that's in this evening's report, a second loop is what I hear about from Trustee McAllister about where does this go. I wanted to indicate that there's at least 2 places that were mentioned by Trustee McAllister that are logical places to see where that content could go. In terms of the Tell Them For Me survey and its design, Superintendent Ferguson and Superintendent Dawes were involved this week at a collaborative session about the design. And what we really do encourage students from all of our different secondary schools is to bring their information to the people who are going to be administering the survey at the site, and then that will make the survey more current in terms of trying to capture some sort of needs. There are set questions in that survey, as the trustees know, and then there are opportunities for choice. I may turn it over just to Superintendent Ferguson just for a minute to comment about this week's proceedings, so that folks know that we are trying to get closer to student voice. And then lastly, Student Trustee Wilson and I are meeting tomorrow to have our first conversation since the meeting last month, and that is something that I'm interested in, about what is the second loop and what does it mean to get a little bit closer to the feedback we've received. I'll just defer to Superintendent Ferguson for a moment just to give trustees a quick sense of what happened this Tuesday at the Tell Them For Me session.
Through you, Chair. So this year we expanded the number of schools taking part to all of our 7 to 12 schools and all of our schools in our areas that have knocked on 7 to 12. So all students from 7 to 12 throughout our board took part. We met here in Brockville. It was a great day. It was well attended. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. There were some microphone glitches that were driving the adults in the room a little bit were bothering us quite a bit, but the students found that hilarious, and I think it added to the fun for them that those of us that were using the microphone were struggling. But the day was great. The collaboration was impressive. To the point, Chair, around the questions, last year through the Tell Them For Me group, the students gave some feedback on questions they'd like to see, and 2 of the questions that we then used were based on that feedback we got from the students who were working on this. So there is that opportunity to have students have direct input into some of the questions that we asked them and their peers. So we look forward to our session again in April when we hear about all the great work that the students are now going to go back and do in their schools to work on some of the issues that were highlighted in Tell Them For Me. And again, there will be that opportunity again for students to give us their feedback on questions they'd like to see added to the survey for the following year.
Okay, thank you. Trustee McDonald, then Trustee Swan. Trustee McDonald?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, it's kind of ironic that we ask, what are we going to do about this information? Because the information that's being gathered is based on the board work plan, and the board work plan is based on the response to our Ipsos culture survey of what students said. So, what are we doing about it? We're creating dialogue. We're actually taking action as we speak. The fact that we have students talking about what the board is doing in response to a previous survey is a good thing. The important thing now is that when the board work plan has been developed, the director's work plan is now in place, we collect more information, we go back and we have a further dialogue about here's what we heard, here's what we're doing, here's the results. And I think that's the important thing that we need to recognize. It's not something that's in isolation always. This conversation that the Student Senate has had is an important one, and it builds on the original information that we received in that culture survey from Ipsos. And the thing with the Ipsos survey is it's board driven. We decide what we want. We decide how many questions are asked. That's all our information. And if we want to use that to help shape how we respond to what students and staff and parents are saying, then that's the tool that we use to be able to do that. And I think everything that we've done thus far to build up to that board work plan needs to encompass some of the comments, the feedback that we do get from Student Senate. And I would say that the important thing moving forward is that when we do the next Ipsos, and it's imminent, is that we need to make sure that we have the buy-in, just as we have the buy-in from Tell Them For Me, that people take part in that. It's open to every student in our secondary sector, 7 to 12. So, it's voluntary to take part, but if we don't hear from you, it's very hard for us to have an understanding of what it is. So, some of the key points that were there are being reiterated again from what students at Student Center are saying. So it's vital and it's critical for us to make sure that we pay attention to what's being said and continue to act in the best interest of students. But I think the missing link is that connection of, even though we've listened and we've heard and now we're acting, we need to communicate, because if there's a lack of understanding of what's being done, then there's a misconception that we're not doing anything, and then that's an important piece for us to make sure that we have those connections in that communication. So thank you for the report and bringing some of that information forward again, because it's an important component of what we do on a regular basis.
Thank you. Trustee Swan.
Through you, Chair. I just had a question. I know the student senators are voted in by their colleagues at school, but I'm wondering, do we have a specific Aboriginal representative, or it just depends on if they run in the school that they attend?
Well, Trustee Swan, I don't believe that the student senators are elected at the school level. In many cases, it's a decision, there's an appointment. Yeah. That's my understanding, Director.
Mr. Chair, through you, there's a range. We have in some schools, and we defer to the local practice at schools. We have some students who do run for an election, some who are appointed because they happen to be the student parliament prime minister, and they carry also a Senate portfolio, and they wear those two hats. We have some cases where expressions of interest were put out to the student body, and there were no takers. So the school's administration appointed or have approached people and asked if they would serve in that capacity. So there is quite a range here.
Okay. But the second part of the question had to do with Indigenous. Do we have a student trustee? Yep.
We do have a First Nations representative on Senate. Unfortunately, she was not able to attend the first Senate meeting, but we've gotten her in the loop through social media, and she's actively working with us now.
Okay. Okay, Trustee Swan?
Thanks.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Seeing the run, and thank you. Oh, Trustee Bill McPherson.
I think one of the challenges here, through the chair, is the difference in the tenure. As trustees elected, we're in for a 4-year term. During our 4-year term, we could have 4 different student trustees here. Then I'm going to go up one level to the ministry. And one of the big hot button issues right now is mental health. Last night at SEAC, we received a report that the initial draft came out in 2013. And now we're just 4 years later, and it's finally hitting the ground. So there's a huge difference between ministry and how quickly or slowly they move, the tenure of us versus the transitional role. And I think each student trustee brings a valuable voice to the table, but technically that voice could change from year to year. And so it's going to be difficult to bring in change that, like we meddled once before. We brought in a policy about electing a designated student senate. In other words, serve as alternate for a year, and that got thrown back at us because they want to do things their way. I think the other challenge here is the lack of a provincial guideline. There's nothing to dictate. It's just, you shall have a student trustee. But I still think this is an excellent report, a lot of good information here, and whether we can act upon it in a timely manner remains to be seen, if we choose that.
Director, you wanted to comment?
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you. Through you, I think Trustee McPherson sort of hit the nail on the head about there's a lot of turnover over the time that a publicly elected board has their term. And I know that the Minister of Education has been petitioned on several occasions by the Ontario Student Trustee Association about, is there another way to revisit the current regulation about student trustees. We've had heard through different channels that the minister is open to receiving suggestions, but recognizes that our students are in sort of a unique role. That some of the people who come forward may be doing that towards the tail end of their academic career and may not have time to do so. I do think that by the very nature of the consultation that was put out over the last 8 weeks that Student Trustee Wilson just reported on, that the province and the minister's office particularly is trying to get a read on what is the current thinking about that, and is there anything to land on that could change how student trustees engage their work and how they have a presence around a board table.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Trustee McDonald?
Just one final about the response to the questions and the time frame. You know, Trustee McPherson mentioned that we had that information. We pushed back. We sent information to Student Senate to get their feedback. We talked about the role and the length of time and the title, and I think it was proteges that we ended up coming up with. And there's value in having that opportunity, but there's also value in if the students themselves want to decide to do something different. That there's value in that too, right? That's the student voice that's talking. And there's a side of me that also, it's hard for someone to commit to a 2-year commitment when you're in high school, because they have a hard time understanding what they're going to do in 3 years' time, right? When they leave high school. And I don't mean that in any negative sense. They're focusing on some big things, and I think it's great that we've got student trustees who are very committed to themselves, but also to all of the students that are here, and we've been very fortunate. So I think it's a lot to ask of a student that might be in grade 10, 11, to think about coming and committing to something for more than 1 year. So that's a hard thing to struggle with for me, but I think there's an opportunity that if the student senate decided that there's something that they feel is a benefit to them as an organization, then we're always going to listen. And I think that's the important piece, is that we don't want to close the door to saying you can't do this or you can't do that. But if there's an opportunity that as a group, collective group, you think there's an opportunity for improvement, I think that's something that can be explored and certainly come back. And I think every one of us around this table, whether you go to the student senate or not, is supportive of a student senate and supportive of our students in general. So we'll do everything we can to make sure that body and all of our students are supported and have an opportunity to have a voice at the table and beyond. So I think just making sure that the student senate does know that you can create a bit of your own destiny to some degree.
Thank you. Okay, student trustee Marshall Wilson, thank you very much. I expect about that length all the time now. Is that? Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, I'm going to turn this over to Director Slawa. This is recommendations for revision of the Upper Canada Policy 423, partnerships, sponsorships, and or cooperative ventures.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, the board has before it this evening a report regarding Policy 423, which is the policy on partnerships, sponsorships, or cooperative ventures. From time to time, the board receives from its staff recommendations to update its policy register and its contents, and this is one example where the staff is bringing forward to you this evening a recommendation for some specific changes to this policy. As you note in the report this evening, trustees, that there is 3 basic revisions being suggested, and they are highlighted in the attachment in yellow. 2 are listed in tonight's report, and one I would like to just draw to your attention. The first one is that all school principals in our system have clear directions with regards to partnerships when they're approached by different levels of government, whether they are municipal, provincial, or federal. Secondly, as noted in the report, the presence of the superintendent of schools is a really important aspect in having schools support dialogues regarding a partnership or a sponsorship or collaboration. As per the Education Act, only a superintendent or supervisory officer of the board can actually bind the corporate board to an agreement. And we would want to make sure then, if there was something that the school felt so strongly that would be a benefit to their students or their school community, that the superintendent was brought in early on and could have the discussion at the executive council table for advice from our business superintendents as well, and then be able to provide the school with advice about proceeding forward, or perhaps, depending on the nature of the opportunity, for it to come forward to the board. Lastly, all agreements must be consistent with the Education Act, Mr. Chair, and that means that the school could not take on a role or commit to an activity that ran contrary to the Act, and also that recognizing that the board, in fact, sets under the Education Act in the sections dealing with governance, sets really the parameters for commitments that schools would make in these types of ventures. So we wanted to make sure that that in refreshing this policy, that we had the opportunity to recommend to you pieces that would strengthen the policy, that would add clarity to how principals would engage opportunities that are brought to their attention locally, and that there is the opportunity to provide support and guidance to walk people through those opportunities when they're brought forward to the school. So, Mr. Chair, I'll turn that back over to you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board might have regarding the recommendations that staff have made.
I think before I turn it over to you, I think I'll get a motion on the floor, and then we'll open up for comments and questions from there. So do I have a mover that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the recommended revisions, Policy 423, Partnerships, Sponsorships, and/or Cooperative Ventures, as presented by senior staff November 8th, 2017. Do I have a mover for that? Trustee McDonald, seconded by Trustee Cram. It's okay. I'm going to open it up to comments or questions. Trustee Wendy McPherson.
Thank you. It just goes, I'm just looking over the parameters of what we say. And we say in here that, so it's on the second page, partners shall not receive product promotion and or free labor by students except as permitted under the cooperative education program. Does that include the volunteer hours, the 40 hours that the kids could get for helping out a group?
Mr. Chair, through you, the community involvement hours that are part of the secondary school diploma is a separate process. It would not fall under this policy.
I realize that it is separate. However, my question is, are we excluding 40-hour kids from this? I guess to be more point.
Mr. Chair, through you, if there were members of the community that came forward and identified that there was opportunities for students to pursue their community involvement hours, and if those community involvement hour opportunities fell within the parameters of what the Ministry of Education has set and the board has set as being reasonable and permissible, then there's nothing that would prevent that.
Okay, thank you.
Trustee Bill McPherson.
Through the chair, just a question of clarity here. Under authority and approval, the first paragraph states that the Board of Trustees retain authority and must approve all board-wide collaborative ventures. Okay, I think I just answered my own question. I withdraw.
I like those kind of questions. Good stuff. Any other comments or questions?
Jeff, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead, Trustee Armour.
Through you, this is to the Director of Education. It says when we're talking about collaborative ventures and sponsorships that such expressions of interest must be directed to the attention of the Secretary of the Board. Is that enough, or should it be put attention to you too, as well as the board chair? What's the protocol for that?
Same person.
Mr. Chair, I might ask if the trustee could just clarify the question. I'm not too sure if I'm following.
Are you talking about the Secretary of the Board being the director?
Yeah, so it has to come through to you. Should we not also, or not to Jeff, but to the director? So should we have both? That's my question.
No, go straight to the director.
It's the Secretary of the Board.
Who is the Secretary of the Board? Yeah, the same person.
No, I know, but should we have both? Should we have, because it's a level of government that would be coming, should it be you as the chair and the Secretary of the Board, not just the Secretary of the Board?
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah.
Bring it to you eventually.
It would eventually come to us because the board retains, trustees retain the authority to approve board-wide collaborative ventures, as it says in paragraph 1.
No, I get.
The initial, it would come through the director as the Secretary of the Board. Yep.
No, I understand that, but go ahead.
Mr. Chair, through you, in response to that, any kind of correspondence that comes to the board that would be of expressions of interest about partnerships, sponsorships, or cooperative ventures would be brought to the Office of the Board's attention, and from there would be a determination about how to proceed.
Does that explain? Trustee McDonald? Go ahead, Trustee Armour.
No, go ahead.
Okay, I get Trustee.
I understand it.
Yep.
However, I'm just saying that is it necessary? Should we have both on there, the Secretary of the Board and the Chair? Should it be brought to both of their attentions?
Okay.
That's my comment.
Okay, thank you. Trustee McDonald?
Well, I think with the way, that, if I may, just to offer some guidance, the way it's worded is, there's nothing preventing a municipality or anyone from copying the chair. But the process legally informing a board of something or potentially binding a board is to go through the secretary of the board, not unlike it is to go through the clerk of a municipality.
Right.
And that's the conduit of the information to come back to that elected governing body, typically from a legal framework.
That explain?
That's more my question, is that does it need to go just to the secretary, or should we have both?
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other comments or questions? Okay, so I have a motion before me. Moved by who were the trustees? Moved by Trustee McDonald and seconded by Trustee Cram, that the Upper Canada District School Board approve the recommended revisions to Policy 423, partnerships, sponsorships, and/or cooperative ventures as presented by senior staff November the 8th, 2017. I ask you to cast your votes on that, please. Trustee McAllister?
I voted.
Thank you. And Trustee Wendy McPherson, in favor? Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next item, report of the Ontario Public School Boards Association. I'll turn this over to OSPA Director David McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did want to bring to our attention some information that occurred on Saturday. This past Saturday, we heard Trustee Jacobs refer to our gathering on the weekend with the Eastern Regional folks. So we met here on Saturday, and typically the agenda is short, but the meetings run long. The dialogue is quite quite good, and we make sure that we have an opportunity to go through and see what the pressure points are across many of the boards in Eastern Ontario. So one of the key things that we did, we started the meeting with is the input from individual boards. So this is an opportunity for boards to come and present or talk about those pressure points that are affecting them, and to see where there's some common ground. And oftentimes it spurs an opportunity that the Eastern Region as a group might move forward and try to get the entire OPSPA executive and OPSPA board of directors to move in a direction that would benefit students or benefit Eastern Ontario in particular. So we had boards update on some of those issues. We also talked about Local Government Week and how boards and individual trustees dealt with it, and we talked about the use of the information that OPSPA provided. In one case, we had one trustee talk about using the template that OPSPA provided, modifying it to themselves and to their particular board, and sending it out to the school so that it could be shared, not just in the civics class, but in other areas as well. We also did review the governance consultation documents, so around our committees and around the role of trustee, honorarium, those types of things. We had some good discussion around those particular areas. And then again around education funding, the consultation guide that is not yet released by the ministry, but is soon to come, and potentially what would be occurring around those particular areas. I would say that every time that there is an opportunity from the ministry to seek feedback from boards of education, OPSPA also provides that feedback, and those documents are always published on the OPSPA website for all trustees and for the general public to read, and always those submissions are in the best interest of the students that are within the English public system. Around the education funding in particular, we know that in the past, when the government or the ministry asks some particular questions, we know there are going to be some significant changes. The general line from OPSPA is that we always want to have GSNs that are fair and equitable across the province, but also that we are fully funded. There are no expectations that boards operate and have to pay for certain things that aren't being funded. There is an opportunity for us to always ask for a review and to update the formula, but we know that that's a big beast. So typically, they've attempted to focus on some key areas, but if there's an opportunity to re-examine that, then that would be welcomed by OPSPA, and I'm sure all the boards across the province. We did have this discussion around EQAO and some of the work that other boards have done across the province. Upcoming events, we do have a Board of Directors meeting the 1st and 2nd of December. Public Education Symposium is in Toronto on the 25th and 27th of January. The Children and Youth Mental Health Summit is that's something that occurs every second year. It's happening this April in Toronto, April 12th and 13th. And then our AGM is May 31st to June 3rd in Niagara Falls. I did also want to bring up a couple of items, if I may, Mr. Chair, around the legislation that is coming before us. Some of the things that are occurring across the province. One of the components is the ministry has announced some changes to the grade 10 career studies course. So there's 4 new areas or 4 areas of learning that will be added: financial literacy, pathways planning, innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, and digital literacy. So those components will be built into the career studies course for all students beginning September 2018. Further information will come out to boards as we get closer to that. We know that there are some things underway in the province around cannabis and the legalization of it and the selling of it. And I'm not talking specifically about that, but I'm talking about the response to from OPSPA to that. Essentially, it's not a school issue that we wanted to verify, and we also are not looking to, or we're looking to ensure that it's not for those legalized sites, that they're not in close proximity to schools. I think there are general concerns about how that's being rolled out and what it looks like. But OPSPA has provided some commentary and some documentation to the government on how that would be implemented and the impact potentially on school communities. I'll leave it at that right now, Mr. Chair, if I may, on the report for OPSPA.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? We had a great turnout. We had quorum. We did have quorum. It was good. Thank you very much for that. Director, any closing comments?
Mr. Chair, yes, thank you. Through you, just want to bring to the attention of the board that our staff are very much invested in the director's work plan. We've had 2 plenary sessions as a senior team within the last week, starting to take stock in advance of our report to you on the meeting on 22 November, where we'll be providing our first update since the plan was presented to you at the end of September. It's pretty exciting stuff for us because we see all kinds of levels of work, and our effort currently is about coordinating our talent and our resources to move forward in the timelines that we set for ourselves to see how we make a difference and impact what we want on behalf of our students. In addition to that, and complementary to it, I already had mentioned, Mr. Chair, that we had a collaborative session with a number of schools, 7 to 12, grades 7 to 12, about the Tell Them For Me survey. As you all know, we had sort of a piloted approach last year to see how that would fit by having mixed teams of school administration, school staff, and students. Incredibly successful and very powerful it was last year, and so much so that we want to adopt that as our model on a go-forward basis by how we design the survey annually that schools use. In addition to that, next week we continue our journey in investing in strong practice in mathematics, and we have 2 days set aside for that as well. Just as a reminder to the board that we received over $1 million of funding to make a difference by how teachers teach and how students learn as it relates to math. And we are fully invested in that. We do want to see that difference happen. And we want our students to feel confident as learners and to, as you heard from a presentation of the board recently, to have the disposition that it takes to be resilient and persistent as you become a problem solver. Lastly, Mr. Chair, I want to remind members of the Board of Trustees that on Friday of this week, November 10th, many of our schools will be holding their Remembrance Day ceremonies for the fallen, and because, as you know, Remembrance Day this year falls on Saturday. They're very important events for our students. It's a time of reflection and a time of appreciation and giving thanks to those who have served in the service and those who are currently serving in the service. And we are trying to build for our students that sense of appreciation that what we do enjoy in Canada doesn't come cheap, and it came on the backs of other people who gave up their lives. So if there are trustees who are thinking about dropping by their local school, would you give the school a call and see when their ceremony is scheduled? I know they'd love to have you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I don't have a lot of comments. Social media is a wonderful tool. When you check out the social media Twitter feed or Facebook, it's not hard to see the wonderful things that are happening in our schools with our young people. It's also easy to see what's happening with our staff, and I know some of our superintendents post some of the wonderful things that are happening with staff engaging in professional development. And it's also a good opportunity to see what's happening in our communities and some of the work that our trustees are doing in the community with some of the local government and so on. So there's a lot of great things happening. We hear a lot of negative things about social media, but I can see that we're certainly using it to our advantage to showcase a lot of the great things that are happening. So keep it up and enjoy it. Okay, I need a motion that we move into private session. Moved by?
I had a question with regards to the Freedom of Information quarterly report.
We're not there yet. We're going to have to go into private session here. Where?
There, 804.
In communication.
Well, that was
Information.
that was an information item, so there's no debate on it. Just read it. And
Well, I understand that, but I had already requested, and I know this in the previous times, to say that this report does nothing for me. I don't know what, it says 2 requests received and completed, but what were the requests? I'd be interested to know what people are requesting. Can we not know what people have requested, what documents they've had? I'm not asking for their name, I'm not asking for anything. I just want to know what everybody's been asking about.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, through you, staff will take a look and see what we can bring back. If there's that kind of interest, we generally give the stats, but that's usually where we had, sort of put the details. But let's take another second look, and we'll be back in touch.
Thank you. Okay, move into private session. Moved by Trustee McAllister, seconded by Trustee Bill McPherson. Just a show of hands. Thank you very much. Okay.